Welcome, everybody, to another one of our cook-alongs, and thank you very much for joining. The first thing that we always do in these cook-alongs is to go through all of the ingredients and the basic equipment that we're going to need, just to make sure everybody is on the same page and you have thought through all of the things and have them at easy access. Once we get started, of course, we're just going to cook right on through. This one's going to be a tiny bit different because I'm probably going to say goodbye to you before your pastel Azteca is finished baking in the oven. But we're going to be making a little dessert if you're cooking that along with us. That is a really fun dessert, really different. But I thought I would throw it in with this one because I know that we have some time while that is baking. I've made one of the pastel Aztecas ahead so that I can show you what it looks like. But you will probably have about 10 more minutes of baking at the end of this thing. So all that said, welcome to my kitchen. Welcome to snowy Chicago. If you're in one of those beautiful sunny places, then more power to you. We got about a foot of snow on the ground outside the window of the kitchen here. But it is winter in Chicago, and this is kind of what we expect. And it's actually quite beautiful snow this time. So let's go through the ingredients first. Now you'll need you'll need 1.5 pounds of tomatillos. So most tomatillos are about 2 ounces. So if that's the case and you're getting to 24, you're going to have someplace around 12 of those tomatillos. If your tomatillos still have the husk on them like that, you're going to need to take that off. Now, here's an interesting thing to show you, I think, is I always say rinse them if they're really sticky. Well, I peeled off this husk from this one and it's stuck on there. So that's because there's a sort of sticky substance on there. You don't really have to have it to get rid of that sticky substance if you don't want to. But if certainly some of the husk has stuck to it, you're going to want to rinse that off. Now you see I have a rimmed baking sheet here. I have a sheet of foil on here because we're going to broil all of this stuff, and I will tell you that it gets sort of difficult to clean, so you may want to put a sheet of foil on there. I have 3 serrano chilies. If you're working with jalapenos or another one, you will probably have less. These 3 serranos will make it kind of spicy. So you'll maybe start with 2 if you don't like very spicy food. I'm putting 3 on here. And then we've got our 8 cloves of garlic, but they're unpeeled here. This is a moment that I'm going to tell you a little trick here. If you want to cut off the base, the root end of each of those, it's going to make the job of peeling these when they come out of the broiler actually a lot easier. Now we're leaving the skin on these guys in order to protect them from getting too brown when they're under the broiler. But I'm just going to cut the base piece, the root end of each one of these off, and you might want to do the same thing just for ease later on in the peeling of them. Okay, so those are there. Now, the one thing I ask everybody to do was to roast and peel poblanos ahead, because well, it would take me about 15 minutes or so to do that, and we're not going to take the time to do that, so I hope that everybody is up with me on that. It's 4 poblanos, so it's a lot of poblanos, and I have 3 of them already roasted and peeled for those of you that are not always familiar with that, so I'm going to show you how to do that part of it. We've got 3 ears of sweet corn we're going to be using, a couple of white onions, medium size. I've got some shredded melting cheese. If you went to your Mexican grocery store, you probably brought something like a Chihuahua cheese. You could be using Jack, mild cheddar, Colby, whatever you prefer. That melts beautifully. Even mozzarella would work in this if you have that. Then I have some ricotta cheese here and some some crema. You could use some creme fraiche. You could use sour cream in this as well. I like something that's a little richer than the sour cream, so we've got that there. Now, I have the tortillas behind me because we're going to work with those separately in a minute, but you need 20 tortillas to make this thing with. If you're going to be making the chocolate dessert, the chocolate mousse with me, I'm going to say you have to have chocolate. You have to have coconut milk. Got a can of that there. A couple of ripe avocados. That will surprise most everyone because you wouldn't expect a chocolate mousse to have avocados in it. And then you need some, you could use, I called for blue agave syrup in this, but you could use honey in it. You could even use a little bit of corn syrup if that's what you have on hand. I'm going to put some mezcal in there. You can choose to put it in there or not. Maybe you've got some tequila that you want to put in there. And then I've got, just for the decorations at the end, a little bit of whipped coconut cream and some of these, the ones that are called the famous chocolate wafers, the Nabiscos. Probably most of you know those guys, but that's just going to be for the decoration. So you will need to have a 9x13 baking dish. Probably everyone's got one of these either in glass or metal. And then we've got a skillet over there. For making our roasted poblano rajas. Make sure you turn your oven on to broil and put the rack at the top level of it. So we're going to start by doing the roasting of the tomatillos and the serrano chilies and the garlic. So I've got that already on our baking dish here with the foil. I'm going to slide it in it's about on the highest level, about 4 inches below my preheated broiler. And then I'm going to move this guy up here and start this cooking of the onions for the roasted poblano rajas. So I'll move all this over here. So our first thing that we're going to do after, of course, doing I got to put a timer on for that because I don't want to let that go too long. So I just have my phone here. It's going to make a really loud sound because I keep the timer on a really loud honking sound because I'm always doing 5 things at once and I want to be able to hear that. So I put that on 6 so that we could, that's about what it takes under my broiler, and my guess is it will be about the same for you. We want to get some blotchy dark spots on top of the tomatillos, and we'll see a little bit of that happening with our serranos as well. So I'm heating a skillet up here before I even start doing the slicing of the onions. So I'm going to put this over about a medium heat here just to let that warm up. Very standard practice in a professional kitchen to heat the pan while you're getting your stuff together so that you're all going into a hot surface and you're going to start cooking evenly. So let's slice these guys up. I'm just going to do my standard way of doing the slicing. I certainly don't want this root end on here, but for this one, I'm going to cut crosswise instead of going end to end, or pole to pole, some people call it. And we just want to go through all of I want to get the root end off of these guys before I start the slicing here. Now we're using white onions here. You may be using yellow onions. I don't know. A lot of people don't know much about the difference between yellow and white onions, but I will say that if you taste this dish made with yellow onions, it will have a different flavor profile because yellow onions will cook up sweeter and they will cook up with a more, sometimes I call it a complex kind of flavor. So it's something that you have to kind of decide. In Mexico, they don't really use yellow onions because they like the bright, crisp, light flavor of the white onion. So that's what I'm using. And that's like if you come and eat at our restaurant, One of the things that people comment about all the time is that the salsa's having this like really bright flavor, and a lot of that comes from the white onions. I've got a little bit of olive oil. You could easily use vegetable oil for this, and put it in. I'm using a large skillet here, and I suggest that you use your largest skillet as well, because that will allow these onions to cook in the right amount of time and evenly. And then they'll just go in here. You should hear a crackle when they go in, meaning that the pan was hot. Once I got it hot, then I added the oil to it, let that just go for 15-20 seconds to heat up. And now I can spread these onions, including this one piece of the root end that I left there, here. And now you can see that I have got them very evenly spread out in the pan so that they can cook really nicely, evenly. I'm going to mix that on and mix that up there. And then let's just go over here to the roasted poblanos. Like I said, I've asked you all to do this, but visually, I just wanted to make sure everybody sees that this is what a roasted poblano looks like when it's done thoroughly. So this one was blackened over a gas flame, evenly blistered all over the outside like that. And once it cools down, you can easily peel off or rub off the black peel there like that. And then you can open it up by just putting your thumb in it and then tearing out the seed pod. This is at the point at which I'm going to take it over to the sink, and I'm going to just rinse it really briefly. Some people don't like that. They think it really washes off a lot of flavor. I disagree. I think if you use water very judiciously, like you can see I'm doing, I'm not like really soaking it in water or anything. I'm just using my wet hand to kind of make sure that I've gotten all of the blackened skin off. Because sometimes when you rub it off, it'll just stick a little bit. So we get all of that off. And then we need to cut these guys up. We got all 4 of them here. You might want to, after you have used water on them, to put them on a paper towel, as we have done these here, and just like kind of dry them a little bit. Okay, I think that's going to be good there. And then we can get rid of this guy on the other side, except I have to rinse my hands again because I still have a lot of that blackened skin all over my hands. Okay, so let's look back at these onions. And they're softening and beginning to turn a little bit translucent. And you can see these ones over here are browned. If you want to get into what would happen in a professional kitchen, we typically don't use a lot of utensils to stir things that are sauteing like this, but we'll toss in the pan. And okay, there's my timer. I told you it was going to be very, very noisy, but I'm going to set it again here so that I can have another 6 minutes after we pull these guys out. What I was going to show you is the little toss like that. We can talk more about that, but you can see it's beginning to brown nicely. Let's take a look at these guys. So this is what I'm looking for. And you can see that these are starting to lose the bright green color. The bright green color is going to an olive green, but they've got blackened splotches on them. And that's what I'm really looking for there. I'll take a pair of tongs now just to be able to easily and quickly turn all these over. And then we're going to expose the bright green side of them. And I think we want to do the same thing with the garlic that's here, because we're roasting the garlic to make it sweet and to lose a lot of that harsh or strong garlic flavor. So I got these guys all turned over, and let's take a look at these serranos. They're not very blotchy dark, but I'm still going to turn them over. And I think they'll be just right in the next amount of time. I don't know if you feel comfortable doing this, but I'm going to turn the garlics all over with my hands. The tongs were a little bit hard for me to move these guys, but they're already starting to soften up. That's what I'm looking for, is to be soft like we would think of as roasted garlic. These will go back in here. I set my timer for 6, probably about 5 minutes more in that timer. So we'll look at them. What I was going to say about these guys is that if you learn to do this tossing thing, you get a real even distribution of everything. In fact, like when I'm going to put a little bit of salt on these guys, and if I want to make sure that that gets mixed well, then I do this kind of tossing. Now, how do you learn to do that kind of tossing? I always suggest that people that, well, you might want to do this in the summertime in the backyard, put a level of beans, dried beans in there, and just go out and practice tossing. Most people, they don't want it to go away from them, so they tend to tip the pan up like this, and they shake it, and nothing happens. The pan is actually tipped away from you, and you're using the curve of the skillet there to bring it back up and over. So it's a very sort of a gentle and quick toss like that. And we've got sauteed onions. They're turning beautifully browned there. Let's cut these poblanos up. So you'll take you may already have done all of this, but I'm going to cut them crosswise. A little bit more than 1/4 of an inch is usually good for this kind of a thing. So we've got that one there. And I think I may be able to just do all of these at once here, but we're going to cut them crosswise. Okay, that's looking good. And then what we're making here is a rajas mixture. And in very traditional cooking, especially restaurants that serve a lot of beef dishes and stuff, they'll oftentimes serve them with these rajas. So we've got this poblanos going into the skillet with the browned onions. And I already put some salt in there, so we've seasoned that. And this will be one of the layers in the Pastel Azteca. So the Pastel Azteca, you can kind of think of it as sort of like a lasagna, if you will, but all Mexican flavors and made not with pasta, but with tortillas. It's a great sort of homey dish, especially for the winter time. Super Bowl's coming up. Maybe you want to make it for that because it'll feed a big group of people. And you'll see the way that I'm going to be doing it here. Well, it's pretty easy to put together. Okay, let's just say that. Now, I think there was an immediate question that has come in.
He wants to know about raw onions versus cooked onions, sometimes chopped, sometimes blended in. How do you know the difference for all that in the tomatillo salsa?
Okay, so we're making a roasted tomatillo salsa, and we are going to roast everything that's going to go into it, but we're not going to put any onions. So I'm not a fan of putting onions in a blender or a food processor because I think that it draws out all the things we don't like about onions. So even if I'm going to make a roasted tomatillo salsa, I'll blend everything and then I'll finally chop the onions because I think the onions need to be rinsed off and added to the salsa to create that flavor that I was talking about before, that bright, clean, pure flavor. Oftentimes, blended onions can just muddy things. Here, we're not going to put any raw onions in it, though we could, it would be fine in it, but we're going to do browned onions, which is going to add to the beautiful sweetness of this dish. Okay, I'm going to turn this guy off because it's ready. We're just about ready with our with our tomatillos. just like that. I am going to be putting in this bowl now grab a spatula here, some ricotta cheese. The drier, the better. In a lot of the grocery stores that I go to, they have this stuff that's put up in the deli department or in the cheese department that they call hand-dipped ricotta. And it tends to be way drier than the stuff you find in the tub. So you might want to check that out. This is my favorite by far. It's the Bellwether brand. It's expensive, but it is the best tasting ricotta I have ever had in my life. Now you may think that, why am I using ricotta? Isn't that an Italian cheese? They make ricotta lots of places, and they make tons of ricotta that they call requesón in Mexico, and they would use it in a dish like this. So I don't only need about the 8 ounces, and this was a 12-ounce batch of it here. So I'm going to take that much out, and then I am going to add to that a cup of crema, and we will go to our broiler and take a look at those tomatillos. I do need to salt this mixture here, and I don't want to forget to do that, so I'm going to do that before we head off to the let's see, I need to put, this is a measured amount of salt going in here, 1 teaspoon of salt that will go in with the ricotta and the crema. Crema could be sour cream, it could be heavy cream, it could be creme fraiche, it could be Mexican crema from your Mexican grocery store. There's lots of possibilities for that. So mix all of that up. And
repeat the name of the ricotta brand?
The ricotta brand is called Bellwether, W-E-T-H-E-R, B-E-L-L-W-E-T-H-E-R. It's so good. Oh my goodness. It's like, yeah, it's more expensive than the others, but splurge sometime and get it because it is so, so good. Okay, next step is to look at what we've got in our under our broiler here, and lo and behold, we have what we need. You can see that there's a lot of juice on the tray here. All that juice is good stuff. It's super flavorful. So we'll use that. You can see that the serranos are got little black spots on them, and all of this garlic is got little black spots on it, but it's soft all the way through. I'm going to set this to the side for just a second while we finish up the prep for what's going to go into our Pastel Azteca. And the last of the ingredients that we really need to talk about here is the corn. So let's cut the corn off the cob. Several different ways to do this. You can take a small bowl like this, turn it upside down in a big bowl, stand these guys on end, and cut them off like that. That's not the way, I've done that for years, and probably a lot of you that have followed me for years have seen me do that or seen me refer to that in recipe writing. My new favorite way to do it is just on the countertop, basically going 4 times through here. So I'm cutting right down to the cob that way, and then turning it a 1/4 of a turn, another 1/4 of a turn, and the last 1/4 of a turn. I always pick it up because there will be a few that haven't gotten off of there like that. So then we will just plow through the rest of these. Some of you may be using frozen corn for this, and that's totally fine. In fact, I usually keep some frozen corn in my freezer just for cases when I need to use it and there's no good fresh corn. Right now, it seems like there's some decent fresh corn in our market, so this works out good to use the fresh stuff, but don't hesitate to use the frozen stuff. In fact, in our restaurants, a lot of times during the summertime, we will get the fresh stuff in and freeze it for us to use in the winter months. Corn freezes very well. Now, if you don't have a scraper like this, I highly recommend that you get one, and then keep it where it's really at easy access in your kitchen, because you can use it like this would be hard to get up, except that using one of these kinds of scrapers here allows me to do it much more efficiently. And then we can get that all moved into a bowl here. All right, we're not going to salt that. We're going to just put that to the side there. And clean up a little bit, and then we're going to make our salsa that's going to be used to layer through this pastel Azteca. So I'm going to take a question. Now, I think there were another question. Do we have another question over there?
Somebody want to know if they could use Greek yogurt instead of the crema.
Yes, you can use Greek yogurt in this instead of the crema. And if you mix it with the ricotta, it will be fine. If you use Greek yogurt in this all by itself instead of the ricotta, it would get curdy and funny inside there. So you have to have something else to work with there. So into the blender jar here is going to go all of this stuff. But let's start with the garlic here, and we need to pull the papery husk off. If you find dark spots on your garlic, look at this. And I'm just going to ask you to come in close. This actually looks, see, it's kind of woody looking on there, but that's okay. This is nicely roasted garlic. It's really soft like that, but it's got some dark spots on this side that almost look like the husk, but it's fine to use it like that. Now, I'm doing this with my hands. You may find it a little bit hot still. And if you do, just save these to the side and let them cool down just a little bit. For me, they're not particularly hot, but I'm used to working with a lot of hot things, so that may be a little bit different for you. So we'll put all of those peeled now. That's the reason I like cutting the base of it off, because the peeling at this point goes really easily. And then we'll put those 3 serranos, or however many hot chilies you have that you're working with, you'll put in there. And then the last thing that we have to do here is to pick this guy up and get all the juice out of here and into our blender jar. So using the tongs is the best way I find, for getting these guys to all easily go down in there. Now you could do this in a food processor if you don't have a blender. I work with a blender a lot, and so that's what you're seeing me use here. I think in the recipe I did write it only saying blender, and I apologize for those of you that don't have a good blender and you could use a food processor. It will work for that. And we're going to blend this to a smooth puree. I'm going to give it a little bit of salt just to start so it blends up in there. And I'm going to start with the same amount of the salt that I put into the ricotta mixture, which will be a teaspoon. We can taste it afterwards and make sure that it's got the right amount of salt. Last ingredient that's going to go in here is some cilantro. And I also have in this roll, this damp towel roll here, some epazote, beautiful epazote, that we'll talk about in a little bit, because I'm going to use that in layering stuff. But grab a big handful of cilantro. It doesn't have to be a measured amount. Some of us like a lot of cilantro. Some of us like a little cilantro. So you make it to suit your own tastes there. And top on. And let's make a puree out of this, which won't take very long at all. So for most blenders, you're going to want to do this on a medium-high speed. I started this one at a medium, and now I'm going to just turn it up a little bit so I can get an almost smooth puree, but I want a little texture left in it. And that's it. Now, at this point, I'm going to suggest to everybody that you taste this, because if this isn't seasoned right, the entire dish won't be good, okay? It'll come out bland or flat tasting. Okay, for me, it's almost there. I started with a teaspoon, but I'm going to add just a little bit more. Going to blend it for just a little, a few seconds just to get that all in there. Okay, and that should be enough. And we are ready to start our layering once we get our tortillas done. So I think there was an immediate question.
Can you make the salsa a day ahead, Ryan asked?
Yes, Ryan, you can make this salsa a day ahead. It will be absolutely fine. I probably wouldn't blend the cilantro into it. I would just leave that separate. And then but when you start to make it, just chop some cilantro up and mix it in there, because the acidity of tomatillos will start to really take the freshness out of the cilantro. So just don't, everything else can go fine. And you could keep it for several days in your refrigerator. Okay, I'm gonna put that guy back where it came from. And let's talk about the tortillas now. I have 2 packages here because what we're going to need is 20 tortillas for this whole thing. So we will just open those guys up. This, for those of you that are not in Chicago, you may also be able to get the El Milagro brand. So I kind of tore it a little bit, but you can see El Milagro corn tortillas. So this is one of the biggest family-owned tortilla factories, and they have branches all over the country now, in the United States. And lots of different places I'm seeing this because they have got sort of spread out into lots of parts of the United States with tortilla factories. It's a company from here in Chicago and a family-owned company. So that is one of the reasons that I'm always recommending it. It's also made with non-GMO corn. So these tortillas have a lot to offer, I think. They have a very distinctive flavor. And when I smell I'm going on with this project, and I'm not even telling you what I'm doing here. I've laid out 5 tortillas. We're supposed to be cooking along, but I should be leading you into what you're doing. Spread 5 tortillas out, either with some vegetable oil and a brush. You want to coat one side of these tortillas like that. I love this oil sprayer, and then stack them all up on top of each other, and do that 4 more times or 3 more times so that you have 20 tortillas total. So I'll go back to talking about El Milagro tortillas. The really nice thing about them is that they are made in the traditional way, where they actually start with corn, not with the masa flour, and they cook the corn with calcium hydroxide in the traditional way and stone grind it, and then they make their tortillas out of that. But they have a very specific way of cleaning the corn, because after you boil the corn, you let it sit overnight basically, and then the next day you come and you wash off all the exterior of the corn that is set with the calcium hydroxide and turned sort of gelatinous. They don't like to clean it as much as some people. So these tortillas have a very distinctive aroma of what we call cal, or calcium hydroxide. And some people absolutely love it. And some people say, no, I like a different kind of tortilla than that. You'll have to make your decision. But if you're working with one of the national brands that you say get in your frozen food counter, you can make this with it. It won't quite have the same kind of flavor as, say, the Milagros. These will play a bigger role than what you might get in your frozen food counter tortilla, or from your frozen food counter tortillas. Okay, now I got all of my tortillas there, all coated on one side with some oil. This is an important step. I will tell you that. If you don't do this step, you may think, oh, I'm just going to put the tortillas in and layer them in. They'll go completely to mush right away. We're protecting them by putting this little bit of oil on them. And the next thing we have to do is heat them up. Now, a lot of people will tell you to do this one by one with a skillet of oil and just like quick saute them. They get a lot more oil on them, and it's a really laborious process. So I use my trusty microwave to do this because it's very efficient. So put them in a plastic bag. Don't seal the bag. Put them into the microwave, and I'm going to put that on there for 1 minute. And we'll come back to that in a minute. I believe we have a question.
A friend from Norway, whose name I can't quite pronounce, asked if she can use, or he, I'm not sure, can use canned tomatillos. And then Patricia asked if she could make this with tomatoes.
Okay, those are really good questions. So we'll start with our friend from Norway. Yes, you could make this with canned tomatillos. I don't write for canned tomatillos anymore because fresh tomatillos are so widely available in the United States. That was not the case 35 years ago when my first book came out, so I always talked about canned tomatillos in that. They are usually canned in a brine, so they have a little bit more of an acidity to them even than the fresh ones are. But if you can get those canned tomatillos, I suggest just drain them. You can roast your garlic and your green chilies separately. And then just put everything in the blender and blend that. It will work. It will work. And then somebody that wants to do this with tomatoes, absolutely. So it's 1.5 pounds of tomatoes. Everything else is the same. And I just want to encourage you to get tomatoes that are ripe. At this time of year, we're lucky in Chicago that we have a really good hothouse tomato, but like a really good one. And I'm very picky about those things. So we do have one that you can use in the wintertime, but mostly in the wintertime, I would use can of fire roasted tomatoes, and that will give you something that's got a really great flavor because they're always packed into those cans right when they're at their peak of freshness.
One more immediate question.
Yes.
For someone who doesn't have a microwave,
Yes.
how can they do it?
I'll go back to say that the old standard before microwaves was to heat a small skillet with some oil in it, and then put your tortilla in there, flip it over, and just when it's like softened, you drain it on paper towels. You do that one by one for all 20 of these things. If you don't have a microwave, then that's the way I would approach that. Okay, we're gonna layer this guy now. I'll put those guys over there. And the first thing that we're gonna put down here is just a little bit of this salsa on the bottom of the 13 by 9 baking dish. And then smear it around just to coat the bottom, just enough to coat the bottom. This will help us to not have a sort of hard tortilla layer on the bottom. Okay, next thing is to unpack our our tortillas here. And they should be warm all the way through and quite pliable now. And so we're going to cut. I'm going to take 2 here, and then I got to go 3 here. So we're going to cut these 3 in half and lay them like, I'm sorry, I did that wrong. Don't do like I just did. Flip them around. So we're going to do 2 that way. And then we are going to do that. And then we have 2 more. So that's the 5 that we will have at each of those layers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then you've got your whole layer there. Now our next step, and we're going to be doing this for all of these layers, is to do about a third of this ricotta mixture here. Did I get that right? A third of this ricotta mixture here. So just dab it down like that. Use the spoon that you had for the salsa and smear that on. And then the next one will be the corn mixture here. I told you I was going to tell you a little bit about a third of that. I told you I was going to tell you a little bit about the epazote here. This is fresh epazote. You don't have to have it to make this by any means, but in the Mexican grocery stores in Chicago, you can get really beautiful epazote right now, and it will give it a very traditional Central Mexico kind of flavor. So I'll just take a few of those leaves and kind of just tear them up and sprinkle them over this middle thing. And the next thing that we have is we're going to put a little bit of this salsa on here, another quarter of it, like that. And then we've got the rajas going to go in there next. And this is a pretty big layer of them. Oh, by the way, if you didn't turn your oven down from broil to baking at about 350 degrees, you should do that now, which is something that I didn't do. So I just heard the broiler go on. So now I'm going to turn this back down. And then the last thing that we're going to do is about a quarter of this melting cheese over the top. Now, I have to say that looks pretty good, right? It's really delicious looking. So let's make another one of these layers. I'm going to have the 2 that go in the middle, and then I've got my 3 that are going to go around the outside. So flat ones, flat side this direction on those 2. And then I always like to flatten it at that point. So the next thing that we're going to put in here will be our ricotta mixture. I'm going to slide that one over there. So now it's about half of what we have left on this. This adds just such a lovely creaminess to the interior layers here. Some people don't put this in a traditional pastel Azteca, but I really like what it adds to it. And then we've got our corn. Again, about half of what's left is what you're going to be using there. We've got some epazote leaves to just tear up and throw in here. Every time you get a bite of this, if you've spent any time at all like in Mexico City, epazote is one of the main flavors in beans and lots of the moles that are served there. So this will give you that kind of a flavor. Another splash of the salsa over everything. Now that I'm going to go back to using my little spatula here to kind of smear it around and give that flavor to everything. And then lastly, on this layer, rajas, I got rajas next. So another half of the rajas that are left. And if you've caramelized your onions like I have there, boy, that will add so much gorgeous sweetness to it when you cut into it. I have to say that I get kind of excited every time that I see this go together like that, because it's so beautiful. A third of the cheese that you have left. And we're ready to start another layer. So we'll do 2 here. And then I take my other 3 and cut those in half. By now you should be getting a little bit of a rhythm with all of this. We'll lay those guys there. And then the end ones. Now this is the point at which I always recommend, because everybody's going to do it the same way where you get it mounded in the middle. So take a second to kind of press it down like that. And we will start all over again with the final layer of ricotta. So dab that around. Remember that everything is going to sort of soften and meld together when it goes into the oven. So we'll smear that all around. And then the next thing that we'll put on it here is the corn. Last bit of corn evenly distributed over the top.
Peace and Love wants to know if you could add black beans.
Okay, so yes, you could add black beans to this. They would never do that in Mexico. That will make it taste sort of what I would say Southwestern. Would it be bad? No, it would be good. I work more in the traditional Mexican way of doing things, and they just wouldn't put it in here. But you could also always add that, and it would be delicious. Okay, the last little bit of epazote is going to go in here, and then I've got those beautiful rajas, the last of those. You could see how this is sort of a little bit along the lines of when you make a nice lasagna and you've got all of these layers you see coming together, and that's what we're doing here, is creating something that is, actually, I don't think this is very hard to do at all, but it's, the layering of it is probably the most time consuming of everything that we have done here. Okay, we've got that, we've got the last of our cheese going on here now, or I'm sorry, half of what's here of the cheese, and then our last of our tortillas. I'm going to do the 3 on the sides first. So we'll lay those cut side out. And then the last 2 tortillas. And then this last layer will only be salsa. I'm going to press it down and make it flat now. And then we've got salsa to go over the top of it here. I probably saved a little bit more than what I put on the rest of the layers, but I kind of wanted that because I wanted to make sure that the tortillas get very nicely covered and don't dry out in the oven. Okay, we did it, folks. We have the cheese to go, the last of the cheese to go over the top of it. Let's put it into the oven, and this will take about 30 minutes or so to bake. It's not a long bake. We just want to get it hot through. Everything else is taken care of. I'm going to slide this into the oven, and then I'm going to take more of your questions while I'm kind of cleaning up this area here. I'm putting this into the middle level of now my 350 degree oven. And what are the questions?
Joel wants to know, could he use homemade tortillas, and if so, is there any specific way they should be?
Okay, homemade tortillas, if you're doing that, I bow down to you. That is so cool. They would be wonderful in this. I will say in this kind of a dish, in the same way you would say about like a lasagna or something, that you don't have to make your own pasta if you're going to make a lasagna. And probably a lot of you even use that no boil lasagna because it makes making this kind of thing really easy. Same thing here. But if you do make your own tortillas, that would be a wonderful labor of love, and it would be very much appreciated. Now, I'll tell you why I say that. Because number one, your tortillas are going to probably be a little bit thicker, and they will play more in all of it. It will just be a really lovely texture in there in the middle. So yes, if you do that, I would bow down to you because it will be a really delicious end product. Do we have another?
Yeah, Rita's so excited about this. She wants to make it, freeze it, and take it on a ski trip. Will that work?
No, I'm so sorry. You could freeze it. I will say that if I was going to freeze it, tortillas are not pasta. They are not as stable as a wheat flour pasta would be. And so if I was going to do that, and I haven't done it, so that's a caveat, I would make it but not bake it. And then I would freeze it and I would defrost it in the refrigerator half a day or something like that before. I wouldn't put it straight from the freezer in because I don't think it would get hot. It would take you an hour or more to bake it, and then it would be dried out on the edges and wouldn't be very good. So to defrost at least partially before you put it into the oven and then bake it, probably 45 minutes or something like that. But that's the way that I would do it. And I want to go on a ski trip too. So I don't know. Maybe that's what I got to figure out a way to do. Any more questions?
What would you drink with it?
Oh, what would you drink? I knew that was going to come. Okay, so beer's great with this. It's a casual dish and it's a good party dish. So I would say beer would be really great to go with it. In the wine category, you can go one of two directions. A white that's like crisp, like a Sauvignon Blanc, is great because tomatillos go well with that. But tomatillos also go really, really well with wines like Grenache and Syrah. So those are native to the Loire Valley, to the Rhone Valley. And so any of those Rhone wines will go really well, or American Grenache or Syrah would be perfect to go with this kind of a thing. Okay, one more question.
Could chicken be
Oh,
added?
I'm really glad that somebody out there has asked about putting any kind of protein in there, but chicken would be the obvious thing that most people would think about. So I will say that I'm going to set my timer here. That I would say chicken, yes, cooked chicken, just shred it and put it in there. Like roast chicken or rotisserie chicken, something like that works really well, or poached chicken if you have that. But also ham is really beautiful in this kind of a thing. Also, a little bit of cooked Mexican chorizo sprinkled in those layers would be perfect. If you want to get super veggie focused, saute some mushrooms in with the rajas. Those would be really good there. This is a dish you can make your own, okay? If you're a person that loves greens, then cook some kale and layer that into this. This is a dish that will do really well with whatever you want to put in there to suit your own taste. But I wanted to do something that was all vegetarian tonight because that's the way I like this thing, but it would welcome a lot of proteins in there. It'll especially welcome a lot of different vegetables as well. So please feel free to make it. What I'm making tonight, and this is what you usually will hear from me, is I'm making a really classic sort of Mexico City pastel Azteca that people in Mexico City would say, yeah, that's the way we make it. Can you vary it and suit your own taste? Of course you can. But what I try to do is give you a benchmark of what you will find in Mexico. So let's change gears while that's in the oven and make this crazy chocolate mousse. The first thing that we're going to do, and I'm working here with 58% chocolate, okay? So for those of you that don't know those numbers, you could say that anything that is higher than 50% chocolate liquor is going to be toward the bittersweet side. If you get something that's 70% chocolate liquor, which means the solids of the cacao bean, and 30%, like if it was 70%, you would say, oh, it's 70% solid cacao bean flavor and 30% chocolate. So anytime you get over 50%, you're moving in that direction of the bittersweet. And if you get to 70%, you're in like it's going to be really bittersweet. So I'm working with 58 here, which is something we use a lot in our restaurants, and I love it. So it will work very nicely in this to give a good chocolate flavor, but you can choose which direction you want to go with that. Mine's 58, and mine is not milk. This could be made with milk chocolate, by the way, but it would be a sort of different thing. So this is kind of a crazy thing that we have to do here, and that is just to I put it in the microwave. There's many ways to melt chocolate, okay? So one is in the microwave, which is I'm using here, 30-second bursts of power. And it will take me about 2 minutes or so to melt it. Now, you'll notice that I work as efficiently as I can. And I know some of you out there don't have microwaves, don't want microwaves and all that, and I totally respect that. So you put a pot of water on, you find a metal bowl that can nestle down into it, and you put your chocolate in there, set it over. You don't want the water to touch the bowl. You want about this much space in between. Bring that water to a simmer, and then just stir that every once in a while until it's thoroughly melted. That will work fine there. You will notice that the first 30 seconds, it doesn't look any different, except if you go down to the bottom here, you can see that it's starting to melt a little bit. So I stir it. I'm going to just take this little gizmo for holding dirty spoons over here, put it back in here, 30 seconds more. And each time I'm going to stir it. And while we're doing that, I'm going to do this thing with the coconut milk. Now, this recipe, by the way, and this may be important to some of you and not others, is an entirely vegan recipe, meaning that people who eat no animal protein at all can eat this. And my guess is that some of you actually have to cook for vegans or vegetarians, or you are those things. So this is not a vegetarian recipe. It goes all the way to vegan, absolutely no animal products in it at all. And that's why we're not using any dairy in it. We are only using coconut, the fat of coconut in it. And but when you buy coconut milk, look at that. See how it's melting very nicely? And like I said, for this amount of chocolate, usually for me it's about 2 minutes of doing this. So another 30 seconds. This is at 100% power here, but I will say that you have to play with your own microwave. This one is 1100 watts, so it's got some power to it. If yours isn't that, you may take 45 seconds or so to do the same thing that mine does in this amount. Okay, so this coconut milk has no gums in it. Maybe when you buy coconut milk, your coconut milk does not have a fat cap on the top that is solid. This one has one that is completely solid. So let me just take a small spoon and cut down through here and see. I want to get down far enough that I have this like, whoop, there's some of that. Okay, so I dislodged the fat cap. And then you see some sort of milky looking stuff underneath. And we want to make sure we get all that fat out of there. And I'm going to clean up the batch that I knocked out of there. Put the top on the blender. Again, you could do this. I'm going to say that you could do this whole thing in a food processor, but it's a little awkward to do in a food processor. It works better in a blender. And I'm going to make this into a solid, not solid, but a uniform mix. That's all it takes for that, and I don't need to clean this blender out because I'm going to use it for the rest of all of this. Okay, so I need to have 1 cup of this mixture. So I'll pour that into here. The remainder of this I'm just going to put back into this can. This is make a really wonderful Thai curry. That's what I do with coconut milk a lot. Okay, so now that cup's going to go back in here. Let's go take a look at the chocolate. I think it's almost ready here. Okay, I'm not even going to go the last 30 seconds on this because I want to show you this. Okay, so there's still some pieces that aren't quite melted in here, but the mixture itself is hot enough that stirring it for that 30 seconds will completely melt it all there. Okay, next thing that we have here is a couple of avocados. And I will tell you that the first time So I'd read a recipe that used avocados in it, but I couldn't find it and I didn't know anything about it. And we had to do a vegan dessert at our restaurant. And so one of the chefs and I got together and he said he had seen the same kind of recipe and we just started playing around with things. And at first I thought this is never going to work because first of all, the color of this gorgeous avocado and that chocolate, what's it going to do? Is it going to turn into something just really, really murky? And nope, it didn't turn into something really murky. And I thought, what about that flavor? Because avocado's got a very distinctive flavor, I think, and one that I absolutely love. And I couldn't even imagine it with any chocolate. And so we started playing around one night, started one batch, and it was like, oh, it's way too much avocado in here. Started another batch, oh, way too little avocado in there because we wouldn't get the creaminess of it. We knew that we needed to use the coconut milk in all of this, and we were playing around with proportions. And then toward the end of the night, we hit on this equation, the 2 avocados with the chocolate and a cup of coconut milk. And I will tell you that it is something that we turn to an awful lot in our restaurant when we need to do something that is a vegan dessert that comes off as absolutely, I don't use this word very much, but sort of decadent chocolate dessert. So here I'm going to pour now our completely melted chocolate in with the avocados. The nice thing about this is that it just everything goes together into the blender. And then I've got a couple of other things that I'm going to put into it. It needs to have a little bit of sweetening. And as I said at the beginning, you could do this with honey if you wanted, or corn syrup. I like to use agave syrup in it. And I need to put, and I'm going to also do a little bit of mezcal because I like the sort of smoky hint that the mezcal gives it. This is from one of our favorite producers, Montelobos. I'm going to put 3 tablespoons of it in here. I don't know if you guys have these little 1/4 cup measures, but I use them an awful lot. And a couple of tablespoons of our agave syrup here. And now we're just going to blend everything together. After I add just a little bit of salt. About a 1/2 teaspoon of salt is what we're going to need to have in this. I will say that it's sort of I was going to call it the trick of a good pastry chef, but it can be a trick for anyone. A little bit of salt in something sweet actually creates the proper contrast so that you can actually appreciate everything without just having sweet in there. Okay, top on. Now here we go. Okay, so when you hear that kind of a sound, then you need to stir up whatever you have in there. A lot of times people will say that to just stir it around and you get any air pockets out. And then we're going to put it back on here and we're going to see if it will go through. Okay, it's moving now. I'm going to put this on the highest speed that it'll go. Now, I told you that you could do this in a food processor, but you would have to have a fairly large food processor for this amount. And the blades of a food processor go at about 1/3 of the speed of a blender. So you might take a lot longer. Now, just look at that. If that's not one of the most beautiful textures you have ever seen, but it's because of the coconut milk and the avocados in there. Okay, yeah, okay, how do you serve this? Yes, you could put it into a bowl and put it in the refrigerator and let it firm up a little bit. Or if you want to do something a little nicer, put it in something that holds about 6 ounces. So that could be little souffle cups. It could be little, those little custard cups that are glass that maybe some people have. But an average coffee cup, not a mug, but a coffee cup, is 6 ounces. So you could easily, if you have cups and saucers, serve this that way. I have something here. I don't know. We had a trip to France one time, and we were in Paris because our daughter was living there for a summer and taking French classes, and she loved yogurt that came in these. So I brought a whole bunch of them home. So that's going to give me some of this. Now, this is probably too, I'm going to have to spoon this out a little bit more. But you could look at this. It's just so beautiful. So spoon it out into your cups, whatever kind of cups you have, or into a large container. And we're about ready to serve stuff. I think you all have a little time left on the baking of your Pastel Azteca. You might, by the way, hear this Pastel Azteca called a tamal Azteca. And but that's actually a slightly different preparation that doesn't use tortillas, but instead uses tamales in it. Last portion of it. Sorry for all the clanging noises here. That one is a little shy because I haven't gone all the way down to the bottom, but just so that you know that this does actually make 6-ounce portions. Okay. Now we're ready to do a couple of different things here. I'm going to take one of those. You can serve this just the way it is right now, and it's an amazing texture, or you can refrigerate it. If you are going to refrigerate it and it can hold for several days, I would suggest that you bring them out of the refrigerator for half an hour before you serve them to soften up just a little bit. Let's go to talk about what our Pastel Azteca is going to look like here. So here's one that we made yesterday, and I did this because I wanted to tell you that if you want to cut really beautiful pieces out of the Pastel Azteca, it's best to let it cool down completely. Cut the pieces. You could refrigerate it overnight if you wanted to, and then warm it up again and serve it. Same thing with the lasagna. It's always going to be sort of unstable when you first bring it out of the oven. By the way, when you bring it out of the oven, if you're going to serve it immediately, just let it sit for about 5 minutes or so, just to start beginning to settle and to set just a bit. But this one right now was made yesterday. And I'll just show you what it looks like when we can take one out. You know, I'm just going to pick this guy up. It's just out of a warming oven here, and show you on a plate here because it's so pretty. You can see all of the layers of it there. And we'll put this over here. You might want to serve, so this is 1/8 of it. If your appetite isn't that big, you might want to actually cut it into 10 pieces. That's a pretty hefty portion of it. I like to serve it with a little salad on the side. This is a salad made out of baby spinach. And then we'll move this guy over here. I'll put this here. And this is a little bit of whipped coconut cream. You can buy just coconut cream in a lot of grocery stores. This is for people who don't want to do whipped cream. Personally, I would put whipped cream on it. But this is whipped coconut cream. And you'll find ones that say they're perfect for whipping. And I'm just going to put a dollop of it over the top. I don't think it whips like cream really does. And then those little beauties, they call them the famous Nabisco wafers, but they work really good as just a little garnish in the top of it there. And then we have, and those are also vegan. And for those of you that are looking for, this would be now an all vegan dessert. So there you have it. I'm eating Nabisco wafers. But I hope you've enjoyed this. It was a little bit tedious to layer it all, but that's what you have here. And you can see how beautiful it is when it comes out of the oven. I hope you'll try this wacky chocolate mousse with the avocado and coconut milk in it, because it is really, really delicious. Do we have any last questions?
Can you assemble it in the morning?
Keep it in the refrigerator during the day. Yes, you can. I would probably assemble it in the morning and bake it in the morning, and then let it sit during the day. And then, like I did this one, just reheat it. So I put a little bit extra cheese on the top of it when I reheated it like that, but it cuts really beautifully. And there's the flavors are just so classic and so delicious with the rajas and that creamy element. Epazote, if you can lay your hands on it, and some cheese to melt all through it. Of course, the roasted tomatillo salsa, which is like one of the most iconic things from especially central Mexico. So I hope you've enjoyed yourselves today. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope this recipe finds a real great home in your kitchen. Thank you again for joining us, and we'll let you know next time we're going to have a cook-along. Thanks so much.